Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's RCN Students webinar. So tonight, our theme and title is It's Time to Care for Our Carers, and we have some absolutely fabulous guests with us this evening. If you are watching us and you feel like you've missed anything, you can always rewind during the webinar, so please feel free to do that. So the reason why we chose this topic as RCN students is because, for many reasons, if I'm completely honest with you, there's a lot of spotlight on the nursing profession or healthcare profession at the moment, but there's also a lot of things going on in regards to burnout of staff, poor mental health, lack of clinical supervision. We could go on, and we hope that this evening is just us as a students committee starting to make that conversation go a bit wider. We'd love to see what your thoughts are by using the hashtag Care for Our Carers as well. But I'm not going to carry on talking for ages, and I'm going to introduce you to our lovely guests. So my name's Jess Sainsbury and I am chair of the RCN Students Committee. We also have another member of the Students Committee helping us out this evening, the lovely Kendall, who is our student member of the Professional Nursing Committee. Our guests this evening, I will allow them to introduce themselves rather than me trying to do it. But first of all, I'll hand over to Ed to introduce himself.
Thanks very much. Drop me in it. My name's Ed Freshwater. Amongst other things, I'm a Deputy Manager of Community Mental Health Team. I'm also Chair of the Royal College of Nursing's Mental Health Forum, which is probably why you've asked me on tonight. And I also host a podcast with another one of the panellists tonight called RMN Behaving Badly.
Lovely, thanks Ed. And next up, we've got Anthony.
Yeah, I'm Anthony. I'm a health visitor by background and I'm the lead organiser for Nurses United UK.
Thanks, Anthony. And next we have Stuart.
Hi there, folks. I'm Stuart McKenzie. I am a senior manager in CAMS services and specialist services such as eating disorders in Ayrshire. In terms of my clinical background, I've worked in areas such as forensic and community mental health, but my background around trade unionism is that I've been a chair of RCN Congress and have listened to many debates about such matters over the years. So I can only assume I've been invited on with my co-host of RMN Behaving Badly, Ed Freshwater, to add a few different dimensions to the conversation.
Thank you very much. And next we have Kate.
Hello, I'm Kate. I'm newly qualified nurse, been qualified about 8-9 months now. Started off on an acute medical ward and I recently started on critical care. And I also help curate the RCN newly qualified network.
Thanks, Kate. And last but not least, we have Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Jess. Hello, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Rafferty. I have the great honour of being President of the Royal College of Nursing. I'm also a Professor of Health Policy at King's College London and probably the oldest person here, although I have to say I have never ever behaved badly.
You should try it. It's fun.
I'll get some lessons from you, Ed.
So what a lineup we've got tonight, guys. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, especially 8 o'clock on a Monday evening. I nearly forgot what day it was then. So for those of you watching us at home, thank you very much for joining us as well. The format of the RCN Students webinars is that we will ask some questions that we've already given to our guests. So we have a question for each of them and they're going to answer those. And then we're going to hand over to you guys at home to ask our lovely guests some questions. Please use the Q&A function that you should hopefully be able to see on your screens. You might need to do a bit of wiggling of the mouse to locate it. So if you submit those questions, you can either give us your names if you want to, but otherwise you can also do it anonymously based on how you joined this evening's session. It'd be lovely to see as many questions as possible. Anything that we're unable to answer this evening due to time restrictions, we only have an hour, unfortunately. The RCN Students Committee will collect those questions, and then we'll get some answers out to you via our social media channels as soon as possible. So, is everyone ready to get going to the questions? Our first question is for Anthony. When carers spend so many hours caring for patients, their families, and the wider society, do you think that they have capacity to care for themselves and their own families?
I think the simple answer to that question is no. I suppose your long form answer is, one of the interesting things I think we've seen at the moment in this country is that everyone now sees what we all see with regards to being nurses, is that care works everywhere in society, and it's incredibly valuable as a commodity, but it's something we value ourselves. And it's not just what registered nurses do, it's your social care workers, but also a lot of unpaid care work, which is normally serviced by your parents and your carers. But they're also, unfortunately, at the moment, because of COVID-19, having to do 24/7 care work themselves. And that's also, I think, highlighted to the public that how important we are as registered nurses, nursing assistants, nursing students, but also our colleagues in education as well, who are teachers, because we've stabilised the economy, and we create the economy ourselves as healthcare workers. And we need to remember that, because it's a really important resource. We're not some cost or expenditure. We're a fundamental lifeblood of the UK. And I think that it's important to remember that before you ask whether or not we've got the capacity to care for ourselves, because we all know the statistics about how much we experience stress, how we don't have an effective mechanism to put safe staffing in there, so we're all feeling burnout with our workloads, how we don't obviously even have a reliable way to recruit nurses because we've got rid of a living bursary, and half of nurses are over 45, so they're probably going to retire in the next 10 years. And within all that, I think that then, though, this is the reason of why I became an organiser, and also why I became a health visitor, actually, is that shout out that I made at the beginning about care work being important and care work being valued by everyone. It's something for us to remember when we're nurses and we're talking to the public, or we're talking to other people who are in our workplaces, or while we're on our placements, because it's the stories that matter to people, and it's the stories that matter to human beings, and that's what people connect to. Because we all want a home, we all want our loved ones to be safe, and we all fundamentally agree that if you're going to work 40 hours in a week, or in most cases even more than that if you're a registered nurse, you should be able to live your life, and you should be able to live a healthy life that's free to be able to not have the pressure of stress, not have the pressure where you're struggling to go to food banks. And when we know that nurses, like your average nurse, top band 5, which is the majority of all nurses, have lost 20% of their wages, that's the thing that we can start to talk about as student nurses, as registered nurses, because that commonality that we have with the public of us all doing care work is something that we can tap into as the most trustworthy profession in the country. And if we were to get organised, if we were to put structures in place, if we were to learn to do things like apply nurses' skills around persuasive conversations, we could apply a political pressure on this in an evidence-based, in a systematic manner, and would be unstoppable, because everyone knows a nurse, everyone's done care work of some kind, and we're powerful. And that's me.
Thank you very much for that. So our next question is for Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, do you think the roles of management and clinical supervision are used effectively as tools to support our carers, or are they seen as punitive or dispensable?
Thank you, Jess. Just unmuting myself there. Well, I think these are old chestnut type questions. I mean, it's never an either or, and I think a lot depends on the culture and leadership environments in which people are actually operating and working. And both you and Anthony have eloquently laid out some of the downsides of work pressures, of excessive workloads That's something that we have seen in our research through a major comparative study across Europe, that in fact this was only applied to England, but nurses in England actually had some of the highest workloads comparable to some of the countries in the mid 2010s, which had the highest levels of austerity. And that also included burnout. So there's some, in terms of the actual position of the profession and other variables like intention to leave, we started the epidemic, and also if you add in our vacancy rates, in a very poor pole position. And I think the thing about middle managers is they're often part of what I call the squeezed middle, because they sit in that kind of almost anatomical position in terms of the hierarchy of the nursing team, and clinical supervision also sits at that level as well, because that's where, if you like, as Anthony's already indicated, most nurses are in band 5. That's something that needs to shift, and of course we need to be advocating, along with pay, for appropriate progression into career structures. That's really, really important to retain people. But I think the fact that intention to leave is largely mediated by the quality of your relationship with your middle manager. When that gets squeezed with workload and that these other pressures, working beyond your contracted hours, as we've seen in the RCN survey, we've also seen from the recent report from the Society of Occupational Medicine that, and this was before COVID as well, that there are some serious sources of stress within nursing. And of course, that's not just something that extends to band 5s and 6s, but it's actually something that's almost all pervasive across the different levels of bandings of nursing more generically. So clinical supervision, you won't be old enough to remember this, but it was something that came in the 1980s, and it was championed by a mental health nurse called Tony Butterworth. And I think one of the spotlights that COVID has shone as well is inequalities of all different kinds. It's amplified and it's really accentuated those, be it in relation to our BAME colleagues, be it in relation to health inequalities within the population, and indeed inequalities in the distribution of resources for CPD, because in medicine we know that doctors, for example, if you're a consultant, you have 2 sessions dedicated to research. Well, none of the other professions have that luxury. Clinical supervision is something that was pioneered in psychology and of course rolled out in mental health nursing, but it's never really been embedded adequately enough in general nursing and other branches. And but if we are going to really tackle the well-being and the health agendas that is so important and vitally and finally being recognised now, we've got to find a way to invest in middle management. That's absolutely critical to retention. So lobbying the Leadership Academy, lobbying Health Education England and all the associated and relevant bodies across our devolved nations is absolutely critical to ensuring that there are sustainable workforce solutions moving forward in clinical supervision. As a fellow Scot, Isabel Menzies Lythe said in her wonderful work, which many of you will be able to quote verbatim, about defence mechanisms as anxiety as a defence mechanism. Task allocation as a defence mechanism against anxiety, that clinical supervision was absolutely key to helping nurses deal with their anxiety. So that needs to be locked in as part of the legacy of COVID, and that's something we need to fight for too.
Thank you so much for that. And actually, I don't know if you've caught it yet, cheeky plug, but Tony Butterworth was actually a guest on 2 of our previous RCN Students webinars. So we've done a whole session on clinical supervision, and then we did a follow-up encouraging people to share their experiences, both good and bad, and it's definitely something as a committee that we are pushing for to kind of change the culture, I guess, no matter what field you're in. So
Jess, can I cheekily jump in there with another cheeky plug?
Go for it. Why
and
not?
Just to let you know that the Royal College of Nursing's Mental Health Forum is leading a project that's a collaboration between all of the professional forums, which is the first time this has happened in the college's history, to develop resources for nurses on clinical supervision, and that project is going to go ahead at the end of the year. So it's extremely exciting times, but keep your eyes open for that one.
That is very exciting, and maybe something that the committee might be able to plug into in some shape or form, because yeah, for us, I guess there's a mix of us from different fields of nursing, different parts of the country, and we're all getting really different experiences, or if at all. Even myself, I found that so I'm doing a dual field degree, so from a mental health side, that has been very much part of my training, whereas on the physical health side of nursing, not so much, which is quite interesting. Anyway, I could go on, but today is not the clinical supervision webinar, is it? Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, that was a fab. So next up, we've got Kate. Kate, as a newly registered nurse, can you tell us about your experience of qualifying and working in such unsettled times, both in regards to COVID-19, but also when we have like massive workforce shortages and nurses demanding more pay? What do you think is missing that would make you feel cared for? Sorry, there's a lot in that for you, Kate.
Thanks. I mean, nurses and all healthcare workers have always faced challenges just in the nature of the job. But the great thing about nursing is that in those times, everybody does pull together. So the more experienced staff sort of take you under their wing and help you with things that you struggle with. And I think COVID-19 has only heightened awareness of workforce shortages. Like, it's something that we knew already. But as a newly qualified nurse, like, it's been daunting. But in some ways, it's almost been like an equalizer, because it's meant new ways of working for everybody. So we've been able to work together to like develop new ways and manage them and still ensure that the care is given, because I mean, that's what's at the heart of it. So I mean, sometimes the workload is unmanageable for one person, and especially as a newly qualified nurse. And the reason that nurses stay late every shift, don't take breaks, you come in early, you do the overtime, is because we care, because we know that that patient is still at the centre of it, and we don't want anything to suffer there. And you know, you could argue as a new graduate after 3 years of being a student that that isn't a bad starting salary, but you have to acknowledge that the level of responsibility, accountability, professionalism, skill, and just emotional intelligence that nursing involves isn't reflected in that pay. And that's what fed back to you, and you're not going to feel appreciated because it's not reflected. And then by the same sense, you're not retain staff or encourage new staff in until you tackle the fact that they don't feel appreciated, because the two don't reflect each other.
Thanks, Kate. So next up, we've got Stuart. Stuart, do you think healthcare professionals are being let down by systems that are meant to be there to offer support, and instead are turning to peer support, social media, and external sources to find ways to cope?
So, having looked at the question and had a chance to reflect on it, I think that the best way is no, I don't think they're being let down by the system or systems. I think they've been let down by successive governments. I think they've been let down by people who are elected to do the paperwork, who take nursing for granted, who take what we do for granted, who assume that financial reward, however measly, is enough to get you into your shift and back out your shift. Yes, there are supervision arrangements in place in mental health, but they're far from what we would see as perfect, I would offer. And I think if you were to look at them across the UK, they will also vary from specialism to specialism, or from area of practice to area of practice. So having managed and currently managing specialist services, it's often the case that you can find a way of making those adjustments in time because of the specialism of the service. I don't think that would be true if you went to an acute adult admission ward with 25 beds and asked the group of 40 plus staff in there what their access to supervision is across the UK. That you would find that mental health nurses have as much access to supervision as you might like. And when you consider the counter-transference which takes place and the emotional dysregulation that they're managing on a regular basis, whether it's in someone's home, whether it's as a result of intoxication or addiction issues, whether it's thinking of our colleagues in learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities. So I think we need to be really clear here that there's not one group of nurses getting some higher level of supervision. Our regulator has failed on numerous occasions to take the opportunity to enshrine in our regulation the right to supervision. Our professional trade unions have failed to grasp the nettle and mandate it. And every time we go and we talk about pay and we talk about pensions, the one thing that gets missed is access to supervision. And Anne-Marie absolutely rightly points out about the SPA process that is enshrined within consultants' contracts. And whilst historically that was for research, I have to tell you that's not used by many doctors for research. That's used for education and used for areas of interest and used to bolster their departments because they've had devolved to them specialist areas of research or interest. It's not just about forwarding their service of their career, it's about keeping things running. So SPAs are frequently used not for what they're intended. If you look at psychology, where it's within their contracts about supervision, psychology have made a great job of ensuring that they have access to supervision arrangements. And they have reflection time and they have consideration time in between appointments. And if you look at waiting list initiatives and waiting list targets, all that's built in. How much time do nurses actually have between appointments? And how are their diaries managed to ensure that they have space to reflect, to consider, to seek a conversation with a colleague about a complex case or a complex family? Because let's face it, in the main, the health inequalities which Anthony pointed out and which Anne-Marie have also pointed out, which are being brought to the fore now, the system's creaking and our profession's creaking. So no, I don't believe the system has let nurses down. I believe politicians have let nurses down. I believe we have failed to ensure that the NMC and before that the UKCC, because I know I might not look it, but I've been around a while. And I'm glad I've had a haircut before we managed to do the pod, because I was looking like Shaggy's dad out of Scooby-Doo. But let's not let people off the hook here who are responsible. This is not something we should have to go and demand, because if there was any compassion or kindness towards our profession, people would understand how important it was. And the language that has been used because of the vacuum that has been created with the lack of clear guidance have resulted in things like wobble rooms, where people distill the action or the emotions of a person struggling because of the sheer weight and complexity of what is unfolding in front of them to a wobble room. That is what comes of a reaction to a pandemic which people knew was in the pipeline, and a systematic failure to plan and mobilise in a way that took kindness and took the appreciation of our profession and all healthcare professions. Because I mean, where's the respite for unpaid carers? Anthony makes a very, very valid point there. Where's the respite for child carers? I mean, so whilst the system has let us down, the same systems have let our society and our communities who are living on the precipice from one meal to the next down. And it's all part of that same cycle. It's all part of that same insipidness around everything being reduced to the bare minimum. It happened with our pensions. It will happen again with Agenda for Change. And another point around that, every registered nurse should be band 6 and up. Every registered nurse. The only way to lift nurses out of poverty is to raise the registration bar to band 6 at the point of registration. Because then you'll show some compassion and kindness, and then nurses will actually feel valued. And so whilst they're worried about their mortgage and they're worried about how they're going to put petrol in their car, I don't think that they're as worried about supervision at times, because they've never been told what to expect from it. They've never been given an undertaking of what they might gain from that, of what they might actually be able to take from that and then give back to their patients. So it's a subject to me that you know, I wish I could do. Anne-Marie speaks about that squeeze of middle managers. I am a senior manager, and I would hate to be a hypocrite and talk about I wish I had more time to build into the system to create greater capacity. But where we're at is capacity is here, resilience is below that, but demand outstrips them both. So we need to redress the balance in one way or another, and by providing proper supervision and enshrining it and mandating it in our registration, that would be the way to go. I hope that answers your question.
I think it answers it and some. Thank you very much. Some excellent points there. And I don't know if it's just me, but for those of you who are watching at home, we're nearly towards the end of our preset questions. So now is the time to get yours in so they can be answered. So thanks very much for that, Stuart. Ed, you're up next. As a mental health professional, do you think that you're expected to be more able to care for yourself and find your own solutions and support?
That's a tough question. I'll be honest. I'm going to say I'm not going to sit on the fence and equivocate my answer like Stuart did there. I think this is something that I want to address, partly from a professional perspective, but also from a personal perspective. Are we expected to be able to care more for ourselves as mental health nurses? I think people expect us to have a greater level of insight into mental illness and be able to spot particularly of things going wrong. That brings with it, I think, the knowledge that we have of the system brings with it two concerns. One is that we know what the shortcuts are, so we can perhaps access stuff more easily. You know, we know how to pitch a complaint to be able to get heard, but the real downside is that we know what the shortcomings of the service is. And to digress very briefly, if you look at the NMC's report into recruitment and retention that was published just a few days ago, they looked at the number of nurses that were thinking of leaving the profession or had left the profession. 16% of staff left the profession, citing disillusionment with the level of care that they were able to provide to their patients. You know, we know how busted the system is, and so it's really difficult to go, where am I going to go for help? It's the same service that I work in that I know is completely broken. So am I just going to refer myself to a 2-year wait to see psychology? But to take this from a personal perspective, there are a lot of barriers in the way. So this time, well, just over a year ago, which was the anniversary of two fairly traumatic events in my family history, I had a fairly major relapse of a long-standing anxiety condition, and I had to take some time off work. Now I phoned my GP and said, you know, I knew how to phrase it, which was great, because that meant I knew how to gain access into the system, and I was able to phone my GP and say, I'm having a major relapse of a pre-existing condition which has been triggered by this. What help can you give me? And my GP said, if it's acute, I can refer you to the local home treatment team, which was where I was working at the time. So I was off sick and being, I could potentially be referred to my colleagues who would come and do a home visit on me. And then next week I could go back to work and my name would still be up on the patient's board, and I would have to do my own discharge paperwork. They could refer me to the community mental health team if it was slightly less serious. But they were the people down the hall that I was having an ongoing argument with about referring my own patients. Or I could refer myself to the local psychology service, which I knew had a 9-month waiting list. So it brings difficulties with it, and I think because we know what the services are and we know who's working in the services, that serves as a barrier to us gaining access to it. So our extra insight, our extra training only goes so far. That's a cheerful answer.
No, thank you for being so open and honest with us, Ed. Some really good points, and it's something. So I'm on extended paid clinical placement, bit of a mouthful, with the home treatment team actually at the moment, and yeah, we've had that where members of staff who have needed to access services have actually, I don't know how they've managed to do it, but there's another trust locally for us for mental health, so we're in the situation where we can access services, but maybe not with our direct colleagues, whereas I know obviously wherever you are in the country it's different, isn't it? So we might not have that. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing and not sitting on the fence. So
never
guys,
short of an opinion, that's for sure.
We are at the end of the questions that the committee have prepared for our lovely guests. So I'm going to hand over to my fabulous co-host Kendall, who's going to start asking questions from the audience. So Kendall, over to you.
Hi everyone. So we've had some really interesting questions come in. The first one is for Kate as a newly qualified nurse. No pressure, Kate. The first one is from Amy, and she has asked, what support mechanisms and good signs of a ward environment should an NQN look out for when applying for jobs? And I guess this is to do with whether that is going to be a supportive and caring environment for that newly qualified nurse. So Kate, did you look for anything in particular when you took up your first role?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's one that you ask everybody, and people ask me now as a newly qualified, and I just think you go where there's a good, strong team ethic. That's the only, I mean, it's not the only advice, but that's the main advice, because you're only as strong as the team around you. So if you're having a bad day, you need to be able to work with people who will acknowledge it and say, do you need help? And come and help you, or just see that you're struggling and come and help you. Somewhere where there's, ask about the preceptorship, ask what does it look like, who will my preceptor be, will I get supernumerary time, will we get a chance to reflect and feedback, is there like a group I can join in, and if I am struggling with something, how do I go about accessing support for that? You know, like, so I qualified and went to an acute medical ward, and straight away was, you know, how can I access support for some of the more traumatic things that I've seen? Because as much as I'd love to switch off as soon as I walked out the door, it's not a skill I've acquired yet. So I've had to go, you know, elsewhere and ask, how do I switch off, you know, when I get home, and switch back into mum mode, and I've got to make pack lunches and school uniforms and try and reflect on that day. So it's just looking for where you feel comfortable asking for help, where they will support you through, where there's a good preceptorship, where there's practice development nurses, practice education facilitators, where they can talk you through the processes and show you where everything is in that place, where although time is stretched for everyone, they will take the time out to teach you and not just go, oh, you're qualified now, off you go. Just, it's something that you have to really keep asking about. Obviously somewhere that you're interested in, but somewhere where there is a good team ethic and a good learning environment, so they encourage you to learn and they want you to progress, which is the main thing, really. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Yes, it did. Thank you so much. That's all the really good advice. Thank you. It's nice to get the newly qualified nurse's perspective. So our second question from the audience is for Anthony, and it is, as a society, how can we ensure that carers are held in high regard from now on and not just during the pandemic?
Oh, right. I think one of the most important things to do is to take ownership of I understand that there's people who want to refer to nursing as a profession and to make it sound specific, and to protect our, what the value of what a nurse is. But I think it's for us to own the fact that what care work is. It's the reason we've used things like the hashtag care for our carers, and it's why it's good that the RCN students have done it, is care, as I said, care work is really valuable. And I think we demean it a bit by shying away from that fact. And I think that what I would say that we need to do is, obviously, I don't think people are going to be surprised, is to get organising around it. We have seen that with regards to this moment, things like the teachers be able to throw off schools reopening, because that's down to their power and the way they're able to work together. I think that, as I was saying before, like telling your stories and being able to talk to the public about that is a really useful and valuable skill. And if you look at the NMC Code of Conduct, there's nothing in there that says that you shouldn't be able to do that out in the public eye. You're supposed to go whistle blow when things are going wrong. You're supposed to be able to speak out. You're supposed to use your evidence base. So I would say that you actually have a professional duty to be able to do that as a nurse. And with regards to valuing carers in the future, I would say that we have to campaign, but we have to do it in a systemic way, in a systematic way, in a way that we're going to be able to win. And that means, apart using things like structures to be able to win. And we do that by building them. And the first thing to do at the moment in COVID is, while you're on placement, is literally just talk to your team and ask them what the issues are. Because most of the time, what you'll see, as you've seen on this call, is people will give you the answers to the problems because we already know what the answers are. And it's just us getting together and realizing that we all agree about the same things. And it's just because people get a bit wary sometimes when we talk about policy, but I assume because people are on this webinar, they already feel that. They already feel that they have the ability to influence things. And it's just remembering like how powerful you are, because when you look at the way that some nurses have done stuff in the past when they've organised, like in Northern Ireland, when you apply like a systematic process to it, when you tell your stories and when you're strong in your convictions and know what you're going to ask, and ask for something big as well, which is why stuff like Fund Our Future is good, because you're asking for like the actual solution to the problem, not a half measure. That's how you're going to actually win. And so that's what I would say would help value carers.
Lovely answer. Thank you so much. It's really nice to have the Northern Ireland illustration. I think that's really useful. And also to know that as the NMC code doesn't forbid us from for standing up from what we believe in and what we think is the right thing to do. So the next question is for Anne-Marie. I have a question here that says, how can we dispel the heroic narrative that, according to the evidence, actually adds more stress and pressure to those working in stressful environments, such as health and social care, without belittling the profession? So for Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Jess, and to the person who put the question. I think it's a great question. Yeah, I abjure the heroic narrative, and I think reframing that in terms of expertise, and I mean, I think it's already gained some traction, and the actual profile of nursing, and if you like, the visualization of that expertise by the public and by politicians, of course, one politician in particular, I think has been quite not only unprecedented, but has gained a profile that it's never had before. And I think we need to build and capitalise on that and understand and, you know, develop our articulacy in our language around the sense of, I know we've had a debate about professionalism, but about the extraordinary levels to which nurses have actually put themselves on the line and put themselves at risk, but the ways in which that's been perceived by other professions as well, not least doctors who've actually written about this in the press, and how impressed they have been when you know, there has been an extra, you know, I think someone, maybe it was Kate, referred to COVID as a great equaliser. So when people have been redeployed, which I think is a great way to frame it, of course, everyone's been outside their comfort zone. And so we've had these, we've had teaming on the fly, which is what, and actually she's probably Scandinavian, Edna Edmondson calls this throwing together of people into new clinical areas, and in which they have to improvise methods to work together, this team effort that was referred to earlier on. So I think it's shining a light on the extraordinary skills, capabilities and expertise that nurses have, and actually being able to use, you know, it is language of kindness, but actually it's moving away from the emotionality, I think, into understanding the technical, the intellectual, and the emotional intelligences, and to which I would add organizational intelligence as well. So for me, nursing equals IQ. You've got to have, you know, a decent intellect. You've got to be clever, and EQ, you have to be emotionally intelligent, and also I think OQ, you know, really well organized. So yeah, let's capitalize on that. Let's really mine this opportunity and get those stories that Anthony's talking about and use them to tell, create this narrative of nursing expertise in action for action. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks, Anne-Marie. Okay, so we have another question, Lucy, one of the viewers. She says, what do you think we as student nurses can do to be more approved?
Sorry, was that for me? Yeah. Your noises.
Yes, please.
I've got a very interesting noises coming through. You sound like a sort of early Bjork album.
I thought it was kind of Bjork with a bit of Dalek, to be honest, Ed.
Yeah, it was very good. I really enjoyed that. It was like when you had if anybody here is old enough to remember dial-up. It sounded a bit like that. I think that is an I'm going to echo everybody else and say these questions coming in are absolutely superb. For your needs to be met as students, Anthony's going to give me a little cheer because I'm going to say organize. It's really important that as students you don't just take the lecturer's word for it, or the placement administrator's word for it, or the nurse in charge's word for it. You've got to ask difficult questions of people and require answers. That's always good to do it by email, respectfully, but I look forward to your response at the end of it and get them to commit to something in writing. If you want your needs to be met, you should be, every single cohort should have a class rep. You should all know who your class rep is. If you haven't got one, stand up and be a class rep, because it is the most important thing you can do aside from passing the course. I was a class rep for 3 years.
Were you a class rep, Ed? Were you really a class rep? Were you really a class rep?
Yes, I was.
I find that very surprising.
I know. Can you imagine me, such a wallflower? I just, when that
Guess
question
what,
came
Ed?
in.
Guess what, Ed? I was a class rep as well.
Colour me surprised. I got an award for it, Stuart. Stick that up your back.
That's the establishment controlling you.
No, it genuinely wasn't. I caused a few faces to be blanched when I received that award. It was brilliant fun. They went, oh my goodness, he's got one as well. But cause trouble. Causing trouble as a student is brilliant because you can hide behind the cover of, I'm just asking for my learning. It's absolutely brilliant. You need to be attending faculty meetings. You need to be attending as many meetings within trusts as you possibly can and ask questions. You've got to represent yourself and you've got to represent other people as well, because as a nurse, you have to go and advocate for people. And there's no better way to get the experience of that than sticking up for your classmates. If you want to do more to get yourselves appreciated, what I'm going to say is stand up for yourselves within the universities and within the workplaces. And the number one thing to do to ensure that happens is, as soon as somebody refers to you as the student, you stop them and correct them and tell them they should know your name by now. And if they don't know it, inform them of it, but don't stand for being called the student. It's something that we need to have a bit of professional self-respect. And so long as we get fobbed off with being called the student or one of the nurses will see you, that's just not good enough. The doctors get names, the psychologists get names, the lecturers get names, the nurse in charge has a name. You've got a name. Expect people to use it. And I'm going to bang the table in a minute. So yes, that's.
Hopefully my sound has improved.
Yay!
There's a lot of themes here. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of themes coming out here. All organised, great. So the next question is, and it says, in this time of uncertainty, how do you encourage people to actively pursue opportunities and development so that we have a fit-for-purpose workforce in the future?
Is that for me? Because I just missed. I couldn't hear you for the first half of the question, and it ended with a fit for purpose workforce for the future.
For the audience, would you like me to ask it just for the audience?
Could you, Jess? That would be helpful. Otherwise, you might just get an answer to a question I've formulated in my own head.
Yeah. So everyone, this question's for Stuart. In this time of uncertainty, how can we encourage people into the profession and encourage those within it already to still actively pursue opportunities and development so that we have a fit for purpose workforce in the future?
Okay, so there's two parts to that, isn't there? How do we keep people in the profession? Well, we keep people in the profession by letting them know that we care. And I don't mean that society. I think we know that people in the main value is. I'm not so much feeling that a lot of nurses, and Anthony pointed out the age profile of nursing at the moment. I'm 44, Anthony, and I have a lot longer than 10 years to go, I can assure you. We need to be absolutely clear. We need to retain the right people who want to be in the profession, and we want to stop people from burning out before they leave. So there's two parts to this. It's how do we mobilise and organise ourselves to ensure that people don't leave, because students coming through need good preceptors and mentors. And if we just keep losing all of the experience out the door because people feel that they're not valued, that they can go and get paid an equal amount of money for doing a job which has less emotional impact upon them, and it allows them to live a life, because let's face it, we don't work, we go to work to allow ourselves to have a life. That's okay to say that. Nursing is a job. It is something that we sign up to do, And that goes back to the language of the war metaphors. We don't sign up to die. We don't. That's not what nursing is. Nursing's about signing up to care and having transferable skills. So we need to look after the people who signed up to nurse. And I think if you can create and engender that positive impression where you don't have the media talking about how many thousands of nurses are leaving because they're not happy, then who's going to be sitting about going, well, I think that's the job for me? You know, there's all these people leaving at the other end. I mean, surely they can't be that unhappy. Getting it right for the people who are in the profession and listening to the right people now and getting the narrative. We need to own the narrative of nursing and stop having it implemented and foisted upon us by the great and the good. And stop people owning what is our profession. That way we can then start to look at bringing students through. I think we have to stop. I think to bring people in, we have to stop putting barriers in the way of caring. We have to go back and accept that nursing is something that's innate without being reminded that it's some, you know, Victoriana of a calling. It's something like, I want, you know, when I was 13, I wanted to be a professional footballer. It wasn't a calling, it was just something I wanted to do, and I thought I was all right at it. And I grew up surrounded by other lads my age who wanted to. What do we need to do to get into the psyche of the population? And how do we create career constructs which allow people to move through the bands to get to a point where they can actually make a decent wage? I think that's how we get it right. If we can get it right for nurses in the profession, and let's not forget our academics as well, because God knows for so long they've put up with a barrel load. It's not my pod, so I'll not use the language that I would normally use. But the reality of the matter is, nurse academics have been driven to the lowest common denominator. The pressures placed upon them in terms of research and output and the class what they're expected to produce. You will not bring people through who feel that they've been supported through their pre-registration if we don't invest in making sure that our nurse academics, lecturers, the colleges which support people into access courses, it has to be driven and woven through. And that goes back to our regulator. The regulator needs to be held to account and has to start to listen. And what we forget is our regulator is by extension part of the government. Don't forget that. The connectivity between our regulator as nurses and the people in 10 Downing Street, it doesn't take 7 degrees of separation to understand what's going on there. So we need to start influencing our regulator. I mean, that's important, because whilst we have a regulator, we have a profession. Some would say, what happens if you remove the regulator? Oh, well, we end up with an AHP stroke health professionals regulator. Well, of course we don't want that, but what we want is a regulator that demonstrates its care and compassion for nurses the way it does for the people who we care for. Does that answer the question? I hope it does.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Regardless, that's the answer you were getting. So.
Oh,
Yes,
hey, there's my face. I'm sorry, our lovely co-host Kendall is having connection issues, so you've got me again, guys, I'm afraid. So I'm very conscious of time, but we are getting some excellent questions coming in. Now, the next one I'm going to ask, I am going to open it up to you guys and see who fancies it. So the question is, how can nurses work on reducing tribalism within the profession to ensure that society sees us as one unified voice and not a fragmented one? Who wants to take that?
Well, I think the mental health nurses should go first because we're more important.
Okay. Do you want to go, Ed?
I'm not entirely sure what the best way to do that is going to be. I think one of the issues is that we do very often become quite tribal and can be prone to a bit of identity politics. I think anybody that follows some of the social media chats on certain subjects will find that very often discussions and debates around things like pay, around things like hours, breaks and what have you, descend not so much into party politics, but into kind of virtue issues. And I think particularly of the disagreements between nurses. Nursing is a graduate profession that should be treated with great respect, to the nursing as a vocation and something that you do for love. And I would be here for my patients regardless. And I think that is probably the biggest issue that we have to overcome, is that kind of split. I think that's very destructive, because it's more complicated than putting it down to something like a party political affiliation or what football team you support. It's one of those things that kind of gets to the very core of what kind of person you are, and it's very emotive. I think probably the best way to tackle an issue like that and build unity is to come up with a collective vision for where we want to be. And the more inspiring that vision is, then the more likely we are to get the profession behind it. And I think that's something we need to do with good, honest, open discussion, is to build a vision of where we want to be, not what we think the current government is going to let us do, and not what we think the current pay banding or trust structures or commissioning or whatever allows us to do, but what we want as professionals and what we think is going to be best for our patients. And as we build that vision, if we do it inclusively, then we'll get everybody along for a ride.
Great, thanks, Ed. Anne-Marie, do you have anything to comment on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the vision. I'm not sure the public quite see the tribalism in the way in which sometimes we might perceive it ourselves. I'm not sure the public understanding quite stretches that far. I think implicitly the public have a perception or of a nurse who's probably a default position is a kind of adult nurse, and now at this moment in time probably one who works in intensive care. And I'm thinking about the long term and the way to think, if you like, craft that vision, which is to really go for the long haul. And it's something that we don't really do. We plan nursing, to get people over the hurdle that Kate and Jess are experiencing just now into qualification, and then it's a bit of a lottery after that. And I think the place where we can bring everyone together is in advanced practice, and that should be the horizon that we plan for. That is most definitely picking up on Stuart's point on regulation, where we should be lobbying to have advanced practice actually regulated, and then that will help to stabilise the senior ranks, pardon the phrase, who are then looking after all the people below, the vast majority of the workforce. The reason we've got such, this is just my personal opinion, such problems with attrition in the profession, the workforce, is because we simply don't have enough nurses in senior positions. It's a weak leadership structure at the top, not because we've got poor leaders, because we simply do not have enough leaders at the bands, beyond 7, in 8s and 9s, and we need a hell of a lot more of those people to support people below. That will create sustainability. So I'm pitching for the skies, guys.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And guys, I know you're probably itching to come in on this question, but I would like to ask one more, if we don't mind going over slightly, because I think we could really do with some practical advice for those of us who are viewing. So it was a question in regards to my internet is going a bit slow, but it's any advice on having to call in sick for mental health. I find it awkward and I feel guilty doing so. It doesn't seem to be a widely acceptable thing, and it should be. What are your thoughts? And I'm going to give this to Ed, if that's okay.
Yeah, I get to go first. Phone in sick. It's an illness, and there's that overused analogy of, you know, if you had a broken leg. Mental illness is not the same as a broken leg, but it is as serious, if not more so. You have every right to take sickness absence if you're ill, and it doesn't matter if it's physical or mental health problems. They are equally serious, and you don't have to explain to your employer in that phone call what is going on. You can phone up and say, I am not well, I am signing myself off for a few days. If it's longer than that, then you can say, I've got a GP note and I'll be sending my GP note to you. But you don't have to disclose it over the phone. That's, you know, if you had food poisoning, you could phone up your employer and say, I've got a bit of a dodgy tummy. You don't have to go, oh my goodness, I was passing loose stools all night, and I was, you know, you don't.
Yeah, but you would have to be able to provide what it looked like in the Bristol school depending on where you worked. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's employment law for this. There's employment law, and nursing is like every other field of employment. You do not have, as you self-certify, to give the person you are phoning any detail. Okay? You don't have to do that. Once your certificate is submitted, your general practitioner will write upon that and endorse the clinical rationale for that absence from work. But to move that aside, the issue here is about routine and quiet.
Can I just add on to that, Stuart, that they also don't get to judge whether or not it's serious enough for you to be off.
It's not about serious. It's. I mean, Ed makes a point. I worked with a cracking CPN years ago who I worked with, and he absolutely hated the analogy of a broken leg. If you had a broken leg, you'd have a cast on, and people would he hated that, because, as he pointed out, how many people actually died of a broken leg, but how many people actually completed suicide from depression? Right? Don't ever undermine or allow that situation to manifest where we take things like a broken leg, which can be plated or pinned, and yes, absolutely, I've broken bones, it's not a pleasant experience. But before that comes the concept of routine inquiry. We recognise that if you ask people how they are on a regular basis and you inquire with empathy and consideration, people can then trust you. So if you have a student on a placement, or you have a staff nurse on a placement, and they feel valued, and they work, and they're in a place where routine inquiry exists, how are you? That quiet moment, they'll find someone that they can phone into. It speaks volumes about clinical areas when people don't feel that they can find that, because they've not had the time to develop that relationship with their line manager, or they've not had the time to be able to talk. You know, I suffer from anxiety, and at times it can be quite debilitating, and I might have to phone up and take a few days off. But you know, who should I phone into? We don't foster an environment where we make that the norm. And in mental health, don't be under any illusions that Ed spoke to you. And, you know, I mean, I know Ed and I work with Ed, and, you know, in our pod, but I mean, anybody being brave enough to discuss and disclose their personal circumstances, that breaks down barriers. That's leadership right there, listening to a disclosure like that.
Thank you very much, guys, for those practical tips and advice. It's really, really good to have. And I guess if you've never done it before, it's really quite, I don't know whether scary is the right word, but it's difficult if it's not something that's, you know, openly talked about in your workplace, or you've seen, you know, negative comments from people when others have been off due to their mental health. I guess it's a culture thing, isn't it? So I knew this was going to happen. My poor chairing. We have gone over time, and I feel like we're only just really scratching the surface here. So thank you very much to our guests this evening. I am going to hand over to each of you in turn, just in case you have any quick closing comments, if that's okay. So I'll go in the order that we started in. So Ed, any closing comments from you?
Well, first of all, I'm going to rebut your suggestion that you've done poor chairing. This is meetings run over. It just happens. Let's all just make peace with that and allow each other time to speak, because having time to speak is way more important than running to time. And that's a little bit of advice that people can take. Yeah. And if anybody's ever listened to our podcast, you'll know that we have no respect for running to time. So yeah. Speak as long as you need to speak and listen as long as you need to listen. And I think you've chaired this brilliantly, by the way. So all of you, thank you.
Excellent guests. It's been a right treat for a Monday evening. Thank you, Ed. Anthony, any closing comments?
You should all listen to registered mental health nurses behaving badly. But no, yeah, thanks for having me on. It was great. Definitely go out there, organise, get involved in your workplaces, fight for the 10% pay rise. And yeah, it's good to speak to you all.
Great closing comments. Thank you very much. Stuart, over to you.
We're one profession. You know, we need to start agreeing on what the shared principles and values are moving forward, and asking questions of the people. The people who can really make a difference, and holding them to account, and not be embarrassed to hold them to account. I'm blown away by the eloquence of people on here tonight. Your chairships, don't doubt yourself, you know, don't doubt yourself, because other people will use that doubt against you. Solidarity, sister.
Thank you, Stuart. And Kate, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for tonight. It's always really interesting to hear more experienced people talk and soak up the advice. I would just echo what they were saying. You know, right from the beginning, you're going to have to advocate for your patients and argue for them and be in some quite scary situations. So as a student, make the most of your voice. Find, like somebody said before, find your voice and use it. Find your leaders and your ward managers and ask them for advice. Just never be scared to ask for anything. And thank you for tonight. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. It's been wonderful having you as a guest as well, and your experiences and tips and advice for our audience are just as valued as all of our other guests on this evening as well. So thank you for taking some time out of your evening as well. And last but not least, Anne-Marie, any closing comments?
Well, just to thank everyone, and brilliant, I think, chairing and contributions, and from obviously Kendall as well. I just want to be a student again. Can I join your gang? God, we're good. We could have such fun. No, I think, you know, the thing is, we've just got to stick together. And to echo what Anthony said, I think at the beginning, you know, we can do one. If we put our mind to something, we can just do anything. Anything. And maybe one final thing, which is on that creativity, you know, point. I think nurses are incredibly creative in all sorts of ways, but they have absolutely no idea just how brilliant they and we are. And so I think we should just give ourselves a wee round of applause, as well as our compeers and Gary as well. I've probably taken over your little role, Jess, and all the techie people who help make this happen. Absolutely fan-dabby-dozy, and I'm certainly going to be tuning into the podcast too.
You
Get
are.
your t-shirt, Anne-Marie. You wear it to your next council meeting.
Brilliant.
We want t-shirts too, don't we, Kendall? Yes, Anne-Marie, you are ticking off some of the bits that I'm going to go through now, but that's absolutely fine. Thank you to all of our guests for your contributions this evening. It's been a really, really great discussion, and I'm glad we've done it via RCN Students, and long may it continue. Thank you very much to my fabulous co-host Kendall, who, despite the robot impression at times, has been wonderful. Thanks to our AV team at the RCN. They put up with our random and fantastic webinars that we have now. And thank you, most importantly, as well, to our audience at home for watching us. Don't fear if you've missed any of this, you are able to rewind it, but we are also going to be popping it on the RCN's YouTube channel. RCN Students do have a part of that now, which is great, where you can catch our previous webinars. So that will be up shortly for everyone to watch, and please share. It would be great to see any further comments from anyone watching in the future. We will share them on our social media channels too. And yeah, I think that's it from us tonight, guys. So sorry we've gone over a bit, but it's been really good, and I've really enjoyed it. Our next webinar is going to be in 2 weeks' time, because we're now spacing them out a bit, guys. We're spacing out the webinars so that people can really look forward to them. So our next one will be week commencing the 3rd of August, and details of which will be released in the lead up to it. So for now, that's it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.